History is rarely shaped by miracles. It is almost always forged in the unforgiving fires of extreme human misery, or buried beneath the suffocating weight of absolute secrecy. To understand the genesis of the most famous mysteries of the modern era, we must descend into absolute darkness. The human mind possesses an innate, almost desperate obsession with creating barriers. We build massive walls of stone to protect our borders. We forge heavy iron locks to secure our wealth, and we invent incredibly complex ciphers to bury our thoughts in the absolute architecture of silence. From the moment humanity invented writing, we simultaneously invented the terrifying need to hide it. Our own thoughts, once extracted from the safety of our skulls and placed onto paper, become inherently vulnerable. They become weapons that can be used against us. Throughout history, impenetrable codes have been broken. Massive empires have collapsed because of intercepted whispers, and hidden truths have been dragged violently into the brutal, unforgiving light. But one message survived. One fragile piece of paper remained perfectly intact, mocking every attempt to break it. It was written by Edward Elgar, one of the most respected, brilliant, and enigmatic musical minds of the late 19th century. A man who built invincible, sweeping architectures using only the mathematics of sound. He lived during the Victorian era, a deeply suffocating, highly repressed period of British history. It was an era where emotions were aggressively censored, where societal rules acted as an iron vice, crushing any display of genuine forbidden passion. In such a dark, restrictive world, words that could not be spoken aloud had to be hidden. They had to be disguised in shadows, masked by polite pleasantries, or locked securely inside cryptograms that no casual observer could ever hope to read. And into this landscape of repressed silence stepped a young woman named Dora Penny, known affectionately to Elgar as Dorabella. She was vibrant, deeply connected to his music, and nearly 2 decades younger than the famous brooding composer. They shared a profound, complex, and highly ambiguous bond. She filled a dark, empty resonance chamber within his highly volatile creative mind. But whatever the true nature of their relationship was, whether it was paternal, platonic, or something dangerously forbidden, it was eventually sealed behind an unbreakable wall of ink. On July 14th, 1897, Edward Elgar sat in the quiet, dusty isolation of his study. He took a fountain pen, dipped it in dark ink, and began to write. But he did not use English. He did not use words. He created a terrifyingly perfect anomaly. He penned exactly 87 characters across 3 short lines on a single sheet of paper. They were strange, squiggly lines consisting of 1, 2, or 3 semicircles, facing in 8 distinct directions. It looked like an alien script, a forgotten dialect pulled directly from the abyss of his subconscious. When Dora received the sealed envelope and unfolded the paper, she was completely paralyzed. She stared at the chaotic labyrinth of ink, entirely unable to comprehend the message. Elgar never gave her the key. He never explained it, not even in passing. She spent the rest of her long life carrying that piece of paper, staring into its absolute mocking emptiness, desperately hoping the symbols would suddenly align and make sense. They never did. She died, an old woman, without ever knowing what the man she so deeply admired had whispered to her in the dark. In 1934, Edward Elgar passed away. He took the architecture of the cipher directly into the grave with him, burying the ultimate truth under cold, wet earth. The message was permanently orphaned in the timeline of history. Logically, the story should have ended right there, buried in a Victorian cemetery. But it didn't. Throughout the 20th century, the greatest cryptologists on Earth, the very same brilliant minds that dismantled the Nazi Enigma machine and altered the course of World War II, turned their intense attention to Elgar's 87 symbols. Military intelligence officers, elite linguistic experts, and genius mathematicians threw their most advanced analytical frameworks at the fragile paper. They mapped it, they reversed it, they ran complex frequency analyses looking for the standard distribution of the English language. And the result? Absolute, humiliating failure. Even in the modern era, as multi-billion-dollar supercomputers and advanced artificial intelligence neural networks are unleashed upon the cipher, the squiggly lines adamantly refuse to surrender. They remain utterly impenetrable. When human beings encounter a void they cannot understand, they desperately try to fill it with theories. The most common assumption is that the cipher is a simple substitution code, hiding a dangerous, forbidden declaration of romantic love. But is it? To assume that a towering genius like Elgar, a man completely obsessed with complex structural perfection and musical mathematics, would create a world-class cryptographic anomaly just to write a simple "I love you" feels like a profound insult to his terrifying intellect. This leads to a far more chilling, brilliant hypothesis. What if we have spent an entire century trying to read something that was never meant to be read? What if the symbols do not represent words or letters or language at all? What if it is a melody? Elite musicologists argue that the specific calculated angles of the semicircles correspond exactly to notes on a musical scale. The cipher isn't a text, it is a song written in a completely bespoke, heavily encrypted musical notation. If this theory is true, it means we are looking at a phantom composition, a piece of music that has never been played, never been heard, and has been trapped in a silent ink-drawn prison for over 130 years. But why go to such extreme lengths? Why bury a piece of your own soul so deep that it outlives the very person you gave it to? The archives of blood and history show us a frightening truth about human psychology. We deeply desire connection, yet we are utterly terrified of being truly, completely understood. Edward Elgar handed a piece of his existence to Dora, but he deliberately, carefully made sure she could never fully touch it. It was a masterpiece of emotional distance. It was a triumph of mystery over intimacy. Today, we live in a highly digitized era of absolute suffocating transparency. Privacy is being systematically eradicated. Secrecy is digitized and sold. And the concept of the unknown is being relentlessly destroyed by search engines and algorithms. In such a sterile world, a code that completely refuses to break feels like a violent, beautiful rebellion. The Dorabella Cipher is a stubborn, ancient refusal to be categorized by modern machines. The symbols are not sloppy. They are not the random, meaningless scribbles of a madman. They are mathematically precise, intentionally designed, and overwhelmingly patient. Imagine that dimly lit study in 1897 one last time. The scratch of the fountain pen finally stopping. The hot, red wax sealing the envelope in the dark. Elgar knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just writing a letter to a friend. He was engineering a ghost that would haunt the world long after his bones turn to dust? What happens if we finally solve it? What if tomorrow a quantum computer translates it into a mundane, boring sentence about the weather? The legend would die instantly. It would become just another trivial footnote in a forgotten biography. Perhaps deep down in our collective psyche, we don't actually want to read it. We need the locked door. We need the unsolvable puzzle. We desperately need to believe that human consciousness can still create something that machines cannot consume. The cipher waits patiently in the archives, unread, unplayed, untouched by time. It sits in the heavy, silent void between the knowable and the eternal, mocking a century of technological progress that has completely failed to decode its silence. And perhaps the most terrifying possibility is not that the Dorabella Cipher has no meaning. Perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that its meaning is so devastatingly simple, so profoundly human, that we are simply too blind to see it. The message remains unread. The darkness remains patient. Subscribe to the Archives of Blood.